Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started because we try to keep everybody on time, and hopefully we have a nice program for you today. Just a couple housekeeping notes, please. There are refreshments of sandwiches and water in the back. Feel free to get that. We also have some brochures up here, and we have some handouts that we'll be bringing out in a minute. But I'd like to welcome everybody to our, actually it's our third. Kind of. Second informative one. First one was just to tell everyone what we're doing. But so we'll call it our third event, which is Key Opportunities and Challenges in Meriden. So to let everyone know, we have another event on June 5th, and we have another event on June 27th. All are here in the library, and all will, don't yell at me, start as close to 4 o'clock as possible. I do know we're 5 minutes behind, but we wanted to let some more people come in. So thank you very much for coming. I'd like to personally thank the speakers for coming into Meriden today. I'll let Dale do some introductions after, but thank you very much, the three of you, for coming. It's 4 of you, actually. We're greatly appreciated. On another housekeeping note, we just wanted to remind everyone that there is going to be a conversation on Tuesday, May 28th. It's an open house presentation from 5 to 6, and then the presentation is from 6 to 7. Are we in this room?
I believe it's in this room.
We believe that it is in this room, so the Meriden Public Library. It is going to be discussing all of the work that is going on 691, Route 15, and 91 interchange. It's a lot of work. It's a good thing to go to, but it is in this room. So it is in this room. It's a lot of work. It's a good thing to go to. It's a project that needs to happen, but what's going to happen for a little while is some traffic. Because there will be lane closures and other things. So the end result will be worth it, but it's going to take a couple of years to get there. And the reason why it takes a couple of years to get there is because you can't shut down the entire highway and work on it solid for a year and a half and then reopen it. So we're doing a lot of shuffling. Everyone has noticed new lanes being created and sideway entrances and exits on 91 and along 691 as well. So we're looking forward to when we can say that project is completed, but I'm sure there's going to be a couple more. So on that note, again, I'd like to welcome you all, and I will pass this over to Dale.
Thank you. All right, we're back again. How's everybody doing? Do we need this?
No, you need this one.
Oh, you gotta turn it on. Okay. I'm not sure we need it anyway, but some of the speakers may need it. So I'll just leave that here for now. You hear me okay? Okay. Welcome everybody, Mayor. So anyway, we're here, as Joe said, on the third of 5 sessions. We have 2 more to go. The idea of these sessions was to bring information to the public, the business community, about key issues in Meriden, so that we can have a conversation as time goes on. Not just to just have a bunch of presentations and present a bunch of information, but as a way to get the public to think and get you to provide feedback either at the session or anytime, really, to Medco, to the city, or to the chamber. So at the end of all these sessions, we're going to do a work plan for economic development for the next 3 years, 4 years. We'll be working on that, and that's why we're going to definitely need your input. And so we've put together sort of a series of workshops that touched on things that you need to deal with or think about in terms of building a good economic development program. So we had the first session on data and market, what the market was like in Meriden, what the key issues are. Tonight we're focusing on more physical things, physical resources, infrastructure issues, planning issues. We're going to talk a little bit about brownfields. Again, all with the idea is we're going to talk to you and get your feedback. If you have questions as things go on, ask them as speakers are up there or afterwards, and we're going to have some social time afterwards for us to talk. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So, I wanted to talk about brownfields. Why is he talking about brownfields? Brownfields are a really important thing in terms of developing a strategy, looking at the physical structure of any community, particularly a community with a manufacturing history or a history in general, as Meriden has. This is the definition by EPA, but you know, many people don't understand the nuances of brownfields, and it's really important for the public to understand what Joe and other folks who work and deal with brownfields, and I do a lot of brownfields work, have to deal with. So when you say, what's going on with that boarded up thing on the corner of X and Y, you understand what they have to go through and some of the terminology you might hear, let's say a public hearing or in a press release. And just as my foil here today, I have Sam Haydock from BL Companies, who is a licensed environmental professional. So if there's any conversation about particular properties or particular issues of brownfields that are technical, Sam is here to help, and I've worked with Sam for probably 20 years on projects, buildings, and land, and BL is a Meriden company, so you should know you have that resource here. And in fact, you know, Meriden's very involved in brownfields now. Tremont Street, 85 Tremont Street, is a 123,000 square foot building. They just got a grant for 51 South Colony Road, and you can talk to Joe offline about what is going to be going on there. The green was contaminated, and so it's really important to access the resources of the state of Connecticut. Again, brownfields can be in a residential neighborhood, old gas station, small manufacturing building, or an industrial area, or if you have, you know, if you had railroad tracks anywhere, or spurs, railroad spurs, before they had regulations, brownfields are there. They're absolutely there. So you need to really have an understanding of brownfields to have a good economic development strategy. Go to the next slide, please. So, look familiar? None of these are in Meriden, by the way, but I bet you have stuff just like this. These are all examples of brownfields, land, buildings, the one in the lower right-hand corner. Inside those buildings are, you know, cleanup problems, you know, old machinery leaking hydraulic fluid. These are things that have to be dealt with. So if Joe looks at a building and he's trying to turn it around with funding, this is the kind of thing he has to deal with. Not just the, you know, the facade of the building or even the land, it's what's in the building. These are what brownfields look like. You might drive by them every day, driving to work or wherever, and just you begin to not even see them after a while. Next slide. These are terms, I'm not going to go into the weeds here on all these terminologies here, but usually brownfields involve building abatement, which could have asbestos, could have lead paint. Anything before 1977 had lead paint. Asbestos was used as a miracle material, like in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Asbestos is in your roof material, your shingles, in concrete, because it's very fibrous. Tell me if I'm right on target, Sam.
No, you're doing good.
No, thanks very much. And land remediation, of course, is dirty dirt, groundwater contamination, and concerns about going off-site. Licensed environmental professional, which Sam is, and BL has many other LEPs on staff. They are, in effect, the state of Connecticut. They are empowered to do things on the site, make decisions, and of course they're accountable to the state. But they're a great resource for working with Joe on properties that are a problem in town. Remedial action plans are, you know, come after all the testing, the soil testing, groundwater testing, and those are the phase 1, 2, and 3. And if you have questions about any of this terminology, I can't tell you how many people I talk to in the real estate community or just regular citizens, chief elected officials, that cannot tell me what a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3 are. So don't be afraid to ask, you know, when we take questions or in between. But these are important things to know, because if you're concerned about something going on in the city, you need to know how long it takes to work on these brownfields. Remedial action plan. How long do brownfield projects take? My standard answer is 2 years to infinity. No, 2 years to 10 years. I mean, it could be 20 years, but you know, what does it mean to be cleaned up? It could be cleaned up, but then testing still has to go on for many, many years. So they don't take a short amount of time. Sometimes you can do buildings in a short amount of time, but generally speaking, you know, the lifespan of doing a brownfield project is between 2 and 10 years. Is what I normally tell people. So you have to be patient in terms of the public. But it's a good.
It's getting better right now. There's a lot of money coming from the feds in particular. They recognize it's a problem, and There's a lot more funding from EPA and even our state of Connecticut, DECD, ARPA money, other some of the other Jobs Act or the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money in those budgets for brownfield redevelopment. So it's, I think the pace has picked up a little bit, but to your point, Camden Middle School probably was abandoned in 2004.
2004.
And they're now just getting to the point of taking down the rest of the building, so 20 years.
Yeah. Not all of our 20, but many of them are. So why do this? So, community sustainability, a lot of brownfields are found in less affluent neighborhoods. Okay, where do they, maybe by a train track from the historic perspective through a poor neighborhood or a low mod neighborhood. So by fixing the brownfields, you're sustaining and growing the community. You're eliminating health hazards, you're eliminating disinvestment, you're encouraging investment, you're creating tax base opportunities. Everybody wants to have a steady mill rate and increase your grant list. And just to give you an example of picking up off of what Sam said, the numbers vary a little bit, but for every dollar that the state of Connecticut puts in for remediation money for a site, there's a multiplier of about $8 of private investment. This is based on years and years of data from the grants and loans and things that they give out. And they usually come out now twice a year with grant funding, and the city just got a grant. So it's actually a very good investment. So because developers don't want to invest their money into contamination, they want to invest it in making the building a building, or creating utilities for their development. So it's like an 8-to-1 multiplier for every dollar. We had trouble trying to get that ratio conversation, right?
The last I saw was closer to 11, 12.
So it's a great investment to work on brownfields, and given the lack of property, and a lot of properties are being developed into market rate housing, and it seems lately we can never get enough of housing in terms of market rate especially.
Just a question on what's your experience, and particularly recently, dealing with, of course, the LEPs are the fact that the state allows LEPs to do a lot of this work is helpful, but working on specific projects under the remediation standards that the state has, I know that there's some uncertainty with respect to whether they have to be modified, those standards have to be modified or not. But what's your experience in dealing with the state with respect to?
Is this for the record, Bruno?
So, so the LEP program was started in '97 because the state had this huge backlog of sites that they couldn't get to. And so essentially we were deputized through our license to manage the investigation and remediation. And it can work well. The complexity of the site makes a difference. But we are helping clean up that backlog some, but there are still a lot of properties that are stuck in Connecticut Transit.
Wendy to the visitor services desk. Wendy to the front visitor services desk. Thank you.
Poor Wendy.
So one of the challenges that we face is funding, and some of these sites can be expensive to clean up. But one of the other challenges we face is achieving compliance to the standards, and the standards change over time. And right now there's an effort to sunset the Transfer Act, which a lot of these brownfield sites are subject to the Connecticut Transfer Act, and create a new set of regulations. That's been ongoing for 4 years, and it's still a work in progress. So we won't know what the new regulations look like. We're beginning to see a glimpse of them and what they look like, and whether it's good or bad. It's still too early to tell. We're trying to get we want a set of regulations that are protective of human health and the environment, but which are also implementable. And as it relates to developers, the reason it's important is developers aren't necessarily afraid to take on risk and even clean up sites, but they need to know how it factors into their budget and their schedule. And so that's really important. The biggest thing we have right now are what is causing issues are what we call emerging contaminants. You've all heard of PFAS, and now they're talking about microplastics and other things. And they're starting to regulate those things, but we don't necessarily have all the standards and policies to understand how to get to closure. So it's a little bit of a work in progress, and it's the PFAS is an issue.
Yeah, there is a very strong coalition of folks working, Sam is one of them, in Hartford, to try to bring common sense to some of these regulations. There's actually, I think there's a public hearing or something coming up next week or very soon on the latest round of the Transfer Act change or whatever.
Well, there's a monthly work group meeting.
Right.
And that would be on June 11th. I think it's the second Tuesday of every month.
Yeah, there is a session on it.
I will tell you that going back a few years, having gray hair around the edges, I can tell you that I've been involved in a number of projects in Connecticut, in this area, and that have failed because the investors, once you get into this morass, nobody wants to invest in it. Now, that's fine if you're talking about a place like Rocky Hill or Wallingford, or where there's other land that you can bulldoze flat and despoil anew, but Meriden doesn't have that advantage.
We've been a long-standing manufacturing community, so most of our developable land, it has to be redeveloped and wouldn't possibly constitute a brownfield site. So these are things from that are hurtful to us as we go look forward for a work plan to be sure that
Right.
that we assess and support the right sizing of the regulation.
Yeah, so there's a need for Meriden to really have this in their work plan as a strategy.
Meriden has a bunch of landed properties, and one that I go by every day that really annoys me is, if you come off I-91 on East Main Street, there's a abandoned gas station that's been there forever. It's a gateway in Meriden, that's what you see when you come into Meriden. Is there any carrot and stick approach that might be possible to do something with that property?
Well, what I'll say as an economic developer is that the smaller ones are the most difficult because there's no profit. You know, there has to be investment by the state. There have to be regulations that are you can deal with. But the big sites always have, I always use Goodwin College in East Hartford as an example. They could cover tens of millions of dollars of cleanup because the upside of the development is so great. But those gas stations are a problem because there's no, they say in real estate, it can't pencil out. There can't be a profit determined. I don't know if you have anything to offer on.
I mean, the municipal brownfield assessment grants, which come through DECD, the very nature of those grants is designed to help pay for the studies so we know what's there. A lot of these properties have a perception that they're contaminated, but no one knows. Doing the investigations can be expensive, although for a small gas station site, you can learn a lot for relatively small money. But the grants help understand what's there so that the developer can then hopefully plan and factor that in to their pro forma. And in some cases, you do the study and you find out it's so bad, no one's going to touch it. You get a whole bunch of money. And in other cases, you find out there's really not that much there, and maybe you can encapsulate it all with your new building and put it under pavement, and you don't have to take it off site. And so, but getting a developer in many cases to undertake those initial studies, there has to be a really strong reason to do that, whether it's a great location or the proposed development that they can absorb that cost. Because in some cases, you do all that due diligence and you end up walking away. So depends on the developer.
And you need permission of the owner to do all this.
And a lot of owners are reticent, to get involved because of their own personal liability. The other thing I would add to what Sam's saying, that the state has the assessment grants where you can kind of find out what it's going to cost or roughly what it's going to cost. They also have planning grants called bar grants. And that, sometimes the bar grants, you're gonna create, let's say, a district or something like that, in like a redevelopment district or something. The bar grant allows you to create, it's not just about the property, it's about the neighborhood, which also leads to other funding. So, I had a question over here.
Yeah, you mentioned something about the owner reluctant to get involved. Isn't that the case that if they have a property and they themselves feel that may have some issues, that if they get involved and they find the issues, then he or she or they are liable? And that's why properties can sit for years, because the inherent liability to the owner, then there's no,
Yeah, 100%. You're 100% right. I think one of the things by having brownfields as part of a work plan is to activate Joe or the city to be proactive. I'm going to talk about land banks in a second. Try to find other tools to take the liability off of the owner, but it takes a lot of communication. Some of these are what I call legacy owners. You know, they might be been in their family for 100 years, or like an old gas station is a great example. And they don't want to sell because they just don't like to sell, but also because they're afraid once it comes out, there might be, you know, something in the soil that they're going to lose their personal assets.
so then the next step for them, and which is negative for the community, of course, is that either they put it in a trust or they just hold on to it, and when they pass away, it's an orphan property, and no one in the family certainly would want.
They usually shield themselves through LLCs. I've been through this a million times. It takes, I will say as advice to the city from doing this, brownfields for 25 years, you have to be an activist out in your community and have a good inventory. I had a property, I won't get into the details, so I could do 3 hours on it, but basically it was a 16,000 square foot old tool building. Owner died, estate bankrupt, half located in New Haven, half located in the other town. We thought it was $500,000 to clean up. It ended up being $2 million to clean up. What do? You know, kids were getting in there doing bad things. So there's just no easy way to do it, but you have to be an activist. Yes, sir.
Is there a place for eminent domain in dealing with this problem? I mean, you hear about eminent domain used for properties that are actually functional and occupied.
Right.
So why cannot this be used for?
Good
The
question.
municipality doesn't want to touch
Well,
it.
let me address the
Well,
question.
At least they have
Yeah.
the ability and the shoulders to then go for grants to evaluate the
But
property.
there's other regulatory regimens too that probably should be looked at, including if something is ugly blighted property, that there is some regulation the city potentially could do to have the building raised. So at least you don't have or even the site capped. But that's a,
So my response to that is really to talk about the tools. The last bullet is brownfield land bank. So there's a couple ways to deal with that. So Medco, I'm not putting you in the business of owning properties, but technically speaking, you need an outside group that will take the liability off all you people, the taxpayers, right? Because if the city takes it for foreclosure, by foreclosure for taxes or whatever, zoning enforcement, but usually it's taxes, then everybody in the city of Meriden is responsible for paying for it. So you need an outside group. It could be Medco in theory.
or an Onyx subsidiary.
Yeah. Or a land bank, which there are a few brownfield land banks in Connecticut. I am involved with one of them. We took a property in Bristol, 100,000 square foot building, it was a Transfer Act site, but had size. This one particular one had size. We took it, we got a grant to clean it up, and now we're working with the city in a parallel universe to find a developer. There are tools to do it. It takes some courage to do it. The other thing I will say about these properties, and as a lawyer, Tom definitely knows about this, it's not just the contamination. They all have problems because they didn't pay their taxes. There's probably several mortgages, sometimes from banks that don't exist anymore. So it's also clearing the title as well as dealing with the brownfield. So I'm going to keep moving because we got a lot of speakers here. I'd also like to recognize Hilda Santiago. Hilda, hi, we just want to introduce you. She is your state rep. That's your state rep. So again, the whole purpose of bringing up brownfields, it's an important element of a good economic development program. So with that, we're gonna go to the next slide. The last session that the next session that Joe mentioned on June 5th is gonna be about funding. And we're gonna have a speaker from the Brownfield program, Binu Shandi, who's excellent to deal with and generous with her cooperation, which means a lot to us, right? Huge. And she's going to be a speaker among other speakers. And this is just a list of all the, Sam was talking about all the resources. There are so many resources that can be available to deal with these properties. So we're going to be talking, I just want to show you the, you know, the amount of things you can work on. Yes?
Can those things be sent out through email to us?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we could do that. And this is being recorded also, but the slides, sure. So I'm going to pivot because we have several speakers today. Thank you for your interest. I'm actually very happy to hear how interested everybody is in brownfields. Usually people aren't that interested in brownfields. But it's really important to Meriden because you are primarily a built-out community, and you know, this is, and remember that 12-to-1 ratio of $12 of private investment for every dollar that comes from that list. So, moving along, you have several things going on in Meriden. You have your downtown area, you have particular sites, you have a mall. I was trained as a planner in my graduate studies. I chose a slightly different path after that, but planners are really, really important to the success of the economy. It's certainly important, and when I thought about the next speaker, I thought about your downtown. I'd like to introduce Emmeline. By the way, all the speakers' bios are out there, rather than spend the time going through all the speakers, but she is the Assistant Director of Planning for the town of Fairfield. She's also the President of the Connecticut American Planning Association. Very experienced. She's going to talk about Fairfield and what they went through in terms of their TOD and some of the other stuff downtown. We understand that Fairfield is different than Meriden demographically, but some of the good planning practices are good planning practices no matter where you live. So with that, come on up. If you need this, otherwise, you're good.
I actually live in Milford. I used to work for the South Central Council of Governments, so I know Meriden, kinda. It's been a while since I've worked in New Haven County. But for Fairfield, we can go to the next slide. For Fairfield, it's actually surprisingly similar from a land use perspective to Meriden in that we don't have large open areas that are ripe for redevelopment, and our development patterns are largely more significantly dense and a result of us being a commercial suburb of Bridgeport. So we actually have, like Meriden, a train station where there have been brownfields that are adjacent to it. We had large manufacturing that employed 7,000 people in the region at the time. And over time, because 95% of Fairfield is zoned residential, this has really become a target location for us from an economic development perspective because we don't have a lot of opportunities to really balance the grand list demands for our residential property owners because so little of our land is zoned commercially. One of the things that we were able to do is create a new train station with a public-private partnership with the DOT, the town of Fairfield, which is actually around the same size as Meriden. I think you folks are a little bit more dense. You have more housing units than we do, but we're still at about 21,000 housing units, 62,000 people in terms of our population. Obviously, our median household income as being part of Fairfield County is higher, and that also affects our property values. Our property values are really, frankly, significantly high, and in the time that I've worked there, have doubled in value, which is really squeezing a lot of the families where we used to have a lot of folks who could be teachers in town or in tradespeople, and now those folks are being priced out. One of the things that we realize that we have to do is we have to diversify our housing stock. You know, housing shortage is a statewide problem across Connecticut, and I say that as the Connecticut chapter APA president. We hear about it. We hear about housing issues in Brooklyn, to Litchfield Hills, to the areas that I think are really kind of the higher density spines along the coast and up into the Hartford corridor. You can go to the next slide. So one of the things that Fairfield did in response to kind of this creation of this third train station in Fairfield is, at the time that the station was being created, we knew that our zoning didn't really allow for the types of development that we wanted to see around the station area. And the gray areas that you can see, that's actually still zoned industrial. This is Bridgeport here. And so these were factory sites. Some of them remain factory sites. Adjacent to Bridgeport, our red is our commercial area. And then it gets residential really, really quickly. But because we were kind of an industrial suburb of Bridgeport, unlike a lot of municipalities, we have as of right duplex zoning. We have as of right fourplex zoning. And then we also, like a lot of Fairfield County communities, we've got areas in the north that are very large lot, multiple acre zones that have no sewer service at all. But this area in particular is really quite dense. I would say it's probably, we have some census tracts that are at about 5,000 people per square mile. So really kind of densely developed, which kind of led us to realize, this is ripe for TOD rezoning. There were actually 2 studies that were done for this area, one of which, this train station came online in 2011. There was a planning study that was done in preparation for that station where they said, ooh, let's do 1 million square feet of office. Surprise, we don't need 1 million square feet of office. And so it languished for about 7 to 8 years before we said, oh my gosh, we need to relook at this area because 1 million square feet of office is not coming. So one of the things that they did is that they looked at areas around the train where they could do 70% residential with ground floor commercial, dwelling unit density at 15 bedrooms per acre, understanding that we do have this deep affordability problem in Fairfield. We did also approve an inclusionary housing requirement at 10% of any development over 10 units at 80% area median income. We also increased the height limit. We understood that our neighbors in Bridgeport were doing the same, and the geography is shared. If you're familiar with this area of Fairfield and Bridgeport, there's the Black Rock neighborhood, which has tons of restaurants, which Fairfield residents love and they go to. It's part of what they consider to be part of their Main Street experience as well. We also looked at lot coverage increases, eliminating an FAR, and then also prescriptive maximum setbacks. I think a lot of times when you're looking at zoning, there's minimum setbacks, but there's no maximum to define where the street edge happens. And as we know, and as we know now more so than ever, a lot of our zoning regulations that were created, you can't replicate the downtowns that we love that are walkable, because we all require these minimums instead of saying, no, but wait, we want our building to be within 10 to 15 feet of the sidewalk. That's pedestrian scale, not a 25-foot minimum.
Is this zoning that you're showing, is that in the red area or?
It's actually the whole green area. So we created what we call the Commerce Drive Design District.
I see, it's within that.
And so that kind of overlaid that area. So Fairfield Metro, again, a partnership between DOT, who built the station, and this 1,500 space lot adjacent to it, but it did cap a brownfield. They created a pad here that was going to create the amenity space for the train station. Right now, there's no restrooms for the train station. I think, again, they thought that development was going to happen really, really quickly, and it didn't. This is a big development pad here. It's about 10 acres. Includes this parcel here, and then this factory has since been demolished. This is also a development parcel, and then we just had an illicit brewing restaurant open adjacent to that. So little by little, the district is is happening. Can we go to the next
Is
slide?
that Long Island Sound?
No, that's Ash Creek Boulevard. And then on the other side is Black Rock. But then,
No, is the water, is that?
no,
water
this
port?
is Ash Creek Boulevard.
Oh, that's a street?
No, this is, I'm sorry, this is Ash Creek Boulevard, this is Ash Creek.
Ash Creek.
So Ash Creek leads into Long Island Sound, so you're not far from the water. So if you were,
What is the flood zone? What are the flood zones there?
because they regraded to put in Ash Creek Boulevard, this property owner and this property owner have both applied for and been granted letter of map changes.
Okay.
So it gets to be, actually the flood zone here is AE 11, and the grading up to here, you're already at elevation 20 at the berm. It's a little bit lower here, but the road is basically at elevation 11, and there's very little of this property that was gonna remain in the flood zone, and then when they redevelop it, the rest of it comes out anyway. So in terms of what we had to kind of take time to do with our constituency was to kind of remind them, because everybody is afraid of new housing that they don't understand, is that housing TOD, when we were making the conversion from 1 million square feet of office to really looking at mixed-use development as being the economic driver in this area, was that there's great tax return on mixed use. You know, so we have, I don't think if you go back to the other slide that shows the area. So there was also, so this is Bigelow T here, but on the other side of the tracks, there's actually a couple developments that happened as a result of that initial zoning package that was approved. So we have a building called Trademark that's about 101 units, has commercial on the ground floor, including a Sally's location. And then there's another building called Alto Now, which is about 160 units. And, you know, for the Trademark building, that's $500,000 of revenue. For the Alto building, that's almost $1 million of revenue. And very few school children. One of the things that we do in Fairfield, because everybody goes, oh my gosh, what's the cost of these gonna be? It's gonna dramatically impact our schools, which, as we all know, our school populations are dropping. So, you know, it's really not that much of an issue, but if you go to the next slide, we do track, and go to the next one, we do track how many school kids every single year are in our multifamilies. And what we will say is the newer units are being constructed to address the housing needs that don't exist in our communities, which are studios, one bedrooms with an office space that's usually not fully enclosed or doesn't have a closet. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the issue with the school children, is it desirable to have a stable number of children, or are they trying to just reduce the amount of kids going to school?
Fairfield actually has just under 10,000 school kids because the quality of education is really high.
Well, that's not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is, you're making plans, is it the desire of the planners to reduce the number of kids going to school, or is to keep it stable? I don't think
I don't know that falls within our jurisdiction as planners. We get into this.
Well, you almost have to, because if you have development and housing, you always hear from the school system that how it's going to impact the schools. So are we not addressing it, or are we?
Well, we are and we aren't. What we know is, like, for 101 units at Trademark, there's only 4 kids. And it ranges between 4 to 7 kids, right? So these are not your drivers of school kids.
No,
the drivers of school kids are your pre-existing single-family housing stock.
I'm not communicating well.
I think what happens also is it's a partnership between planning and economic development. When you are dealing with businesses you're trying to bring to town, the conversation around the type of housing that you have nothing to do with kids, it has to do with the employees of the businesses that might be interested in locating in your community. So if you have a place, a business coming in that has a lot of, you know, millennials or whatever the category is, they need 1-bedroom apartments. They don't need 2-bedroom apartments. So the decision is really an economic development decision as much as it is anything else.
And I would say too, I mean, you know, again, because we look at all of our multifamily developments, anything over 10 units in town, if we've got 10,000 school kids and they generate only 300 school kids amongst the, I don't know, 3,000 multifamily units that we have in town, that's not the story as to whether or not we're maintaining our school district numbers.
Very, very different here.
Okay, so apartments are apartments, and part of it, so we actually drilled down because, you know, we got this.
Keeping those statistics is important.
Yeah, and we got this question from our Board of Ed because they were like, oh my gosh, because we have several schools that are racially imbalanced. And they happen to be closest to this area, but we said, you know, we've only got 5% of our land area that's zoned for commercial redevelopment that we can really kind of target reinvestment in. We can't change where those lots are located, but you can redistrict your schools. They don't really like to hear us tell them that, but that's, yes.
Now that you mentioned that you have that diversity program within your plans, what are your plans to change it to make it more diverse?
Well, that's really the purview of the Board of Ed. We have to address, so when we look at housing stock today in Connecticut, 68% of all housing stock in Connecticut, in Fairfield, I think it's 60% in Connecticut generally, it's 1 and 2 person households without children. So we can't ignore our needs to diversify our housing stock because of 30% of our households when 60% of our households are in housing stock that's frankly probably not right-sized for them. So we need to keep addressing the housing diversity issue through building more housing. We don't have a lack of 3-bedroom options in town. Affordability is, yes, absolutely a problem, but it's not that size that's the problem. It's getting more units that people can downsize into and people can start out in, that we're having a problem with in our community. And I think, you know, I think that's part of the question that you guys have to ask yourselves as well is, what does our population need today? What do we need to produce in order to keep our population housed and stable? What are the needs that aren't being addressed by what you have? And then that kind of starts to indicate to you where you need to focus your redevelopment efforts, where infill can be sensitive, what those units can be targeted towards. Should they be 2? Should they be 1? Should they be studios? So again, what we found was that TOD developments are great for our grand list. They're great for diversifying our housing stock. One of the things, if we go to the next slide, is that when the station was approved and installed, we did a lot of automotive transportation infrastructure upgrades. And we also kind of looked at what our, if we go to the next slide, what our sewer needs are for this area. Meriden is an old community, just like Fairfield is an old community. It was shocking to us to realize that 50% of the flow that's going to the plant is I&I. It's inflow and infiltration. We need to repair our pipes and we need to maximize the size of the pipes because what's going to the plant is 50% water. It's not effluent that needs to be treated. It's because the pipes are old and broken, and sometimes it's even the manholes that are allowing for inflow and infiltration. So we did get a grant from the state of Connecticut to upgrade the sewer line, which is what we're doing. And the development here is dependent upon that upgrade, as well as the rest of the town, the efficiency of our wastewater treatment facility. If we go to the next slide. So the other thing that we've done since then is we've realized, we did in that 2018 planning study that we did, we realized, wow, there is a really, really big need. We had a market study analysis that was done to look at what our market need is in this area. And it actually led us to go from that 15 bedrooms per acre up to 75 bedrooms per acre. That our need is greater than what we realized doing the planning to the lead up to the 2011 opening of the train station. And so now we've got both this development here, which is going to be about 250 units. This development here was approved for 360 units, but the developer is going to come back in for about 660 units. Because of easements here, they're going to be installing a green space. One of the things that I think is so great about Meriden is the Meriden Green, that you guys were able to kind of do this really fantastic project. For us and kind of creating a neighborhood here, we've realized that one of the things that we have to go back to and what we're applying for grants for today, this is kind of a lousy pedestrian environment. We are building a neighborhood for people at pretty high density, at a walkable density, but as the community, we now have a responsibility to go back and look at our bike ped connections. We look at our traffic data, our crash data, and it's not great. So now it's kind of our responsibility to kind of work within the public realm to improve those things. We also recognize that even though our boundary is basically here, We are not an island. We have this direct relationship to our neighbors in the city of Bridgeport. And so we are applying for a half-mile radius study to improve the bike ped network within that area, understanding that, you know, this is Fairfield Avenue down here. This is where a lot of these folks who are living here will walk down to go to restaurants, go to small stores and shops, and the BJ's Wholesale and the Whole Foods Market are the two biggest supermarkets over the jurisdictional line in Fairfield, where folks are going to have to do their heavy lift shopping. So, you know, there's a jurisdictional boundary, but this is a neighborhood, and we need to kind of start to treat it as such. So that's kind of where our next stage of planning is going.
I can just add a little more color on how difficult all that is. We actually were involved in designing a pedestrian bridge to go from Black Rock to the Metro Center. And it's a really full project, and it would involve some streetscape improvements in Black Rock to make it more pedestrian friendly. And in that process, because Ash Creek is a navigable waterway with federal jurisdiction, we came in and said you have to test and potentially clean up the creek. It's sitting there now, no one's doing anything. All we wanted to do was build a pedestrian bridge. So these are the hurdles that you face with all this type of planning between the local municipalities, the state, and the federal government. It's a huge challenge.
And, you know, the one cautionary tale that I would say too is that for the town, on behalf of this particular property owner here, we did apply for a brownfields grant, and unfortunately we were told, well, the developer was told, that it wouldn't just apply to the cleanup, it would apply to the whole project, at which point the developer said, thank you, but no thank you. Because to his estimate, it would have cost an additional $10 million to build the project.
Yeah, it's another example of, we have this great program, clean up brownfield, and the legislature, any developer received more than $1 million, not just the cleanup, but the entire project is subject to prevailing wage. In the case of Fairfield Metro, in order to receive a $4 million cleanup grant, the developer's project would have had to spend another $25 million just for prevailing wage labor costs. Makes no sense.
There's
So,
a lot of grants I saw for $999.
$999,000, that's
Yeah.
true.
So thankfully, I mean, I think our developer, you know, they are confident that they can get the funding that they need to continue on with that project. I know we're, you know, a lot of developers, you know, we're not quite so lucky, you know, and timing is everything. So we cross our fingers that, for example, this developer that's here is going to keep going with their project, because they have one building under the ground, out of the ground now, and they've kind of redesigned what this will be. But they've been a little quiet, so we get a little nervous. And, you know, I think as the town, we just really kind of try to support them, check in. How are you guys doing? What can we do? Can we get you in front of the Plan and Zoning Commission for the entitlement changes that you want to do?
What kind of asks were they by the developers of the town? Tax incentives, I assume.
So they're talking.
Any infrastructure improvements?
So they're talking about, for this development here, they are talking about a tax incentive program, because we want them to go from, they were approved at 12%, deed restricted affordable at 80% AMI. We want to have them go to 20. So in order to do that, they're in conversations about a tax abatement program for the lifetime of those deed restricted units.
But they're not asking this to the town to do anything. I know in other communities that I've represented in my career, developers have been very, very reluctant to get involved with when a city has to do something, because cities tend to be notorious to be fickle from one.
We are
to another,
we are
and the
doing our
project may not
best.
Happen, so it's always
Yeah.
wait until this town does what it's gonna do, and then we'll invest our money.
Well, so here's best laid plans. What I will say is that we did this TOD study in 2018. It was adopted in 2019. And unfortunately, we've had these host of zoning regulation changes that we've kind of been talking about our board with. And in Fairfield, the Plan and Zoning Commission is elected. So we lost some of our elected commissioners, which meant we had to kind of bring the other ones back up to speed. the developers were like, well, we're just going to bring them. And so as staff, we had to advocate very strongly to say, we did this very extensive planning process. This is what the community decided that they wanted to see here, even though I know that, some of you might be new, but, we had a very public planning process, and, this is a great.
Is the zoning authority, or does it?
They are. No, it doesn't go to council at all. So, okay, thanks.
So, as I said before, good planning is good planning no matter where you do it. And I think one of the messages sort of along the lines of your question is you have to listen to what the market is asking for and try to balance the community's feelings about it versus what the market is asking for. In terms of the housing, which is the most sensitive issue that always comes up, outside of, redistricting, this is probably the absolute worst thing you have to deal with. But as a state rep, the whole issue of requiring, developers to pay for the entire project, after getting some relief on brownfields, for example, these are things that need to be talked about and worked through. But planning and economic development is a collaborative thing. They should be different. I'm a big fan of keeping them separate, but working together, because there's value to both things. Hi, Arthur, how you doing? So along the line of government collaboration and the physical structure of a community is transportation. So we have the esteemed, come on up, Ben Limmer from Connecticut DOT to talk about some DOT and transit stuff, and then we'll go to more transportation information after Ben.
Transit stuff. I like the esteemed part, but checks in the mail for sure. Yeah, so thank you all for having me. Excited to be here. Ben Limmer, I am Bureau Chief of Transit for the DOT. I'd love to answer any and all tough questions on this, but believe me, I am not qualified at all. But looking forward to this open house next week, I think it is, next Tuesday. So, yeah, so the Fairfield Black Rock stuff is definitely exciting. We are actually working on renaming the station.
Fairfield Black Rock, I'm sorry.
Fairfield Black Rock. I already have it in my head. Certainly, any and all economic activity that happens near the station areas contributes significantly to not only keeping all of the customers we have today, but also continuing to let the rail system grow and prosper in the future. Speaking of, a lot of people ask me, so how's it going with ridership on all the various lines? Happy to report that we are doing very well, better than our peers for sure. The New Haven line system is about 75 to 80% of pre-pandemic ridership, which is certainly great news. The Hartford line is near 100% of pre-pandemic ridership. A lot of great reasons for that, and I can get into that over time. The Waterbury line has been very, very strong, specifically for a branch. And then the Shoreline East is lagging behind. It's about 30%, roughly, about a third of pre-pandemic. But we're doing lots of marketing across all rail lines to make sure that we are not only keeping the people we have, but also growing ridership in the future. Yeah, so Hartford line's doing well. Its ridership is continuing to grow. The New Haven line and Hartford line, we are seeing a lot of people use it for leisure activities, which is completely different than before the pandemic, when people were using it only to commute. I shouldn't say only, but mostly. We're seeing heavier ridership on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday ridership is, unless it's leisure, it's generally our lowest performing day of the week, which is incredible. Saturdays and Sundays are incredibly strong. On the Hartford line, New Haven line, the Amtrak ridership as well. There are a couple new Amtrak services that happened, like last year. There's a couple of trains that go direct from Springfield all the way down. So that's called the Northeast Regional. I take that one quite a bit. So yeah, it's certainly all good news on the train side. It's even better news on the bus side. Many of our bus systems are exceeding pre-pandemic ridership. There's no doubt that during the pandemic, the federal level, the state level, and even the local level throughout the country, people recognize the value of transportation to connect people to jobs, educational opportunities, and the like. So our bus system is no different. Actually, from a ridership perspective, is starting to outpace rail ridership overall. Most people wouldn't, don't necessarily think that. But yeah, last year we had about 35, 36 million bus riders and about 29 million rail riders. But it's all good news into the future. So speaking of bus service, we did add the governor, as well as the legislature did pass a bus service expansion package, which added bus services throughout the state. We were really looking at filling in the gaps, connecting people to job opportunities, educational opportunities, but really gaps in service, either days of the week or times of the day. There was a lot of shortage of bus service on nights and on weekends, because not everybody works 9 to 5, certainly. So last fall we launched 5 bus routes in this area, and they're happy to report doing very, very well. It's actually contributed to a significant growth in ridership. Some months we've seen about a 15% increase, which is huge considering the amount of service we added, which was significant, but it wasn't nearly 15% overall. So that's certainly great news. Let's see, what else should we talk about? Hartford line. Not only are we doing well with ridership, but we also have it's a $700 million project overall. About, what was that, 6 years ago, 7 years ago? But we have a pretty ambitious capital program for the Hartford line as well. We have a station under construction in Windsor Locks. We're trying to get to construction in Enfield, and we are actively working on double tracking the entire length of the Hartford line. There's a few segments where it's currently double tracked, make the trains go faster, less conflict. We did get a federal grant last year for that, so we did get a little money, but we're continuing to try and build up the Hartford program. I did talk with Amtrak earlier today. We're also having a conversation about when and how we rebuild the river bridge to the north. So, that's a huge project, but it is an Amtrak-owned railroad right away, so we very much partner with them on any and all capital activities on the Hartford line. There are a few stations that have probably been talked about over the years on the Hartford line, which are further off. Those are kind of in the early planning stages. It's West Hartford, North Haven, and then the one that's furthest out would be somewhere right around Newington. So with that, I could talk about transit all day, but happy to take any questions, even anything I didn't mention. Yes, sir.
Just a question, what do you see your role of DOT with respect to coordinating the bus service and the train service, where you have train stations, with respect to the last mile problem within that jurisdiction? So for example, Meriden has Research Parkway, which is on the other side of town. People may work there, but if they want to take the train to come into Meriden, there's no really easy way to get there unless they cruise or to get to work and back, to utilize the mass transit. So I'm wondering, what kind of planning are you guys doing in-house to coordinate those?
Certainly. Great question, and one we discuss often. I mean, first of all, it's making sure that the bus network and the rail, the bus network is connecting the right places, and when it gets to the train station, that those schedules are coordinated. Sounds easy, but on the Northeast Corridor or the Hartford line, juggling schedules with all of the rail traffic and the stakeholders is easier said than done, but we're getting a lot better at it. And then from there, if we still have some gaps, we absolutely talk about all the time what would be the best option, what type of partners need to be at the table, and then how can we best facilitate all of those conversations about the first and last mile. Oftentimes it's as simple as, ped connections, sidewalks, or other transportation forms. But we absolutely, last year we passed a complete streets policy because we heard quite a bit that we needed to have, from a policy perspective, better ways to construct streets to connect various areas, whether it's education, employment, whatever it might be. So hopefully answers your question. Yes.
Because if those are not well connected, in Connecticut, I know Meriden are not well connected, and then, if you look up and down the line, Hartford line, obviously, you can see that they're not very well connected. So there's a lot of work to be done, maybe include cooperation between the state and local transit folks,
Yes.
local planners.
Yes.
Does Research Parkway have, for lack of a better word, an association of the owners of the businesses, and any kind of coordinated effort there? I worked on a project in Long Island where they're basically their version of Research Parkway. They put together a collaboration, working with transportation system in Long Island.
Right, so you're looking at Research Parkway, you're also looking at the mall, the hospital, correct?
And many other.
And you've got certain things where there are sort of low-hanging fruit that we may be able to, so this is something for us to think about and maybe work on.
This is definitely this is a work plan item in the top 5.
Okay, good to hear. Good to hear. Speaking of work plan, one of the things on mine is to make sure that our bus routes reflect exactly how people are utilizing public transportation today, because how they're using it today is much different than it was in 2018, even though it was only 6 years ago. So we're going to be starting this whole statewide bus planning effort and be very thoughtful about how our bus routes should be routed, what exactly are their frequencies and hours and so forth. So we hope to make sure that we connect as many of these centers as possible in the future, if they're not already.
I always think about workforce development when I think about bus routes, so maybe it's an obvious question, but when you think about bus routes, are you thinking about, hospital would be a great example. Well, there's a lot of folks that would really benefit from having a strong access to bus service. Basically based on the cluster of businesses in a geographic area or at one big location.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Huge part of the calculation. So.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts? Anything I didn't mention? Okay. Yes.
You opened you opened yourself up to this Middleton. Do you know anything about that project? It's similar in scope to this almost.
Which part? The bus service? Oh, you mean the roadway? I do not. I did see a presentation, but that same one was the one that was presented to the public. I can't handle that one. All I know is when I drive it, I'm like, man, somebody should fix this. But so
Right away.
Did I hear recently about on-demand transportation alternatives that are available in some parts of the state?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So it's termed microtransit. So we are piloting microtransit, which is, think of it as it's a shuttle that doesn't have a defined bus route. It has a zone that it covers. And so we're piloting this at 9 locations across the state. Again, it was a product of the state legislature as well as the governor's office. It's very, it's one of those newer concepts in the field of transit, and I'm excited to see how it does. It's really designed to be an infill service where a regular bus might not make as much economic sense.
Be sure that you tell us, put us on the list to find out more about that, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we're seeing is missing, and it might work.
Okay.
So we definitely have an interest.
Will do. Thank you for that.
And don't forget, there's flyers here for the meeting on the 691 project.
That's the people showing up at Portland. That's the people showing up at Portland grants and pitchforks.
That's why I didn't touch the loud nine thing, so, thank you all.
And we're gonna be here for a while afterwards, so they can.
Okay.
Okay, as I introduce our next speaker, there's a handout. On the heels of Ben's presentation, we have Laura Francis, who's the Deputy Director and the Director of Transportation Services at the South Central Connecticut Council of Governments, of which Meriden is a member. And Laura, and one of the main things that SCROG does is deal with transportation programs, transportation funding. There's a lot of exciting things going on that Meriden can tap into, and I'm just going to turn it over.
Thank you, Dale. So those of you who are not familiar with councils of government, we have 9 of them in the state of Connecticut. They have been created by our Connecticut general statutes, and every town in Connecticut is a member of a council of government. And by statute, the governing body and the voting member is the chief elected or chief official of the town. So it's your mayor, your town manager, or your first selectman are voting members, and many of our COGs also act as the metropolitan planning organization for the region. And that is the governing body of all of the federal transportation dollars that come into our state and into our regions. So SCROG, South Central Regional Council of Governments, is made up of 15 municipalities. There, you can see in the handout, from Meriden to New Haven to Milford to Madison. It's a very diverse region, and we're very fortunate that we have the city of New Haven with all of its resources as our flagship community. Our staffing is pretty small, but mighty. Carl Lamento is our executive director, and he is scheduled to retire on June 30. So if you have worked with Carl in the past in many of iterations of his career, please make it a point to contact him and congratulate him on an illustrious career and hopefully for a healthy and long retirement. Chris Rappa is our finance director. Stephanie Camp is our director of regional planning and municipal services. Jim Road, our principal planner. And Tatum Thomas is our newest hire. They are a transportation planner, GIS, data manager. And I say this, and I'm going to emphasize on the role that Tatum is playing, because we want to build out our in-house capacity to do a lot more work with data, with GIS, with mapping, so that we can, as a regional planning agency, make better decisions that are based more on data and evidence-based decision-making. We do have open positions, and I know that all of you in this room, in whatever capacity you come here in, know that it's hiring in today's environment is very, very tough. So we just made offers to a new municipal services coordinator and a community highway safety specialist, and we're hoping, with fingers crossed, that those offers are accepted. Still have positions open: transportation planner, transportation project manager, and a regional planner. So all this planning, what do we do? You heard today, I think, a theme. Projects like some of which you are contemplating here in Meriden, and some of projects that you've completed and what Emmeline talked about, those projects don't just happen without good foundational planning documents to support them. And that is a lot of what COGS do. And right now, with our federal transportation dollars, which is what we call the UPWP plan, the Unified Planning Work Program, we're working on some pretty impactful, what we hope will be very impactful, regional studies. One, a regional mobility study for aging and disabled communities. Connecticut is an older population state, and we need to take a look at the difficulties that those communities have in getting around our state. Regional freight study that we hope is complementary, certainly, to the new regional state freight plan, but one that will drill down into our region to see if we can improve some of the bottlenecks that we have in our region. A regional active transportation study, that's another word for some of our previous studies that we did, bike pedestrian planning. We are calling it active transportation planning because a bike ped plan is a little bit of a misnomer, right? You might think that's just for pedestrians, that's just for cyclists. Oh, I'm not either of those. But let's face it, we are all invested, whether we drive our cars, whether we're walking, whether we're cycling, whether we're on our motorcycle. We all have an vested interest in making sure that all those users of our roadways are safe. We're doing a regional congestion management study, and here's what I want you to pay attention to. We do set aside funding every 2-year UPWP cycle for municipal studies. And this is when a municipality can make a pitch for a municipal study to study something that's very unique and local to you, whether that's a corridor study, an intersection study, a bike ped study, a traffic study, anything that you need to support your planning process. So make sure, we already have had 2 solicitations in this cycle for some studies. So please think of us as your first stop, because we can either offer funding for some of your planning efforts, or we can connect the dots for you to get assistance from our partners at the state of Connecticut, or perhaps our other COG partners. For instance, we are currently partnering with RiverCog on 2 things. Microtransit, we're partnering with them to bring microtransit into Guilford and Madison. And we're partnering with RiverCog on the Connecticut Loop Trail. So we worked very closely with a study with your great staff here in Meriden on the Meriden side of the Connecticut Loop Trail to make some connection, finish some of the connections of that study. Now we're working with RiverCog so that we connect Meriden into Middletown. And we've already had some preliminary discussions with RiverCog, City of Middletown, and with Meriden to possibly apply for a RACE grant that could help with constructing of those connections, which will not just be recreational, but will connect, create some connectivity to the train station, to the bus station, and everything. We're now looking at trails not only as a recreational activity, but as a place where people can use for commuting to work. It could be the connection to that, what we call, that last mile, the first mile, to get to public transit. Maybe you can roll to the train station. You can roll to the bus station that can get you to that next hub. We do have some committees that are working within our organization. The Transportation and Technical Committee is the first stop of recommending to the full board a lot of our funding programs. Meriden, you are very active members of that committee, so thank you for that. Our Regional Planning Commission, which is an advisory board to our local planning and zoning commissions. We work a lot on referrals so that neighboring municipalities can hear about what other municipalities are doing and make determinations whether there's impact. We have working groups, solid waste and recycling working group. Our housing working group is one of our most active and I would say successful working groups, trying to help our municipalities solve the very difficult but important problem of affordability in our state and housing diversity for sure. Some of the programs that we do administer that are also of very big importance to you, one is the Local Transportation Capital Improvement Program, LOTCIP. And let me tell you, I came from the town of Durham to this job and Rivercog. Rivercog's my home cog. And I use the LOTCIP program in Durham. We are over-programmed in Rivercog probably for the next 5 years. At Scrog, we have a surplus. So we are under-programmed. So it is first come, first serve. You have a LOTCIP eligible project, get it to us and we will help you expedite. And this is a great program because the program pays for 100% of construction. The municipality has to pay for the design. Now, sometimes design can be up to 20% of a project cost. Sometimes it's less. But regardless, what a great investment return on those dollars to get 100%.
Yeah, we start out, she's talking about
LOTCIP.
Could you give examples of how what people do?
So I'll give you a very real example. We just got an application from Meriden for a bridge project, $12 million project that we are going to help shepherd through the system. And and we have excess money. And since I came here and realized at Scrog and realized this money and got instantly so jealous, I have been really, beating the drum about making sure we spend that money because the state of Connecticut, through the DOT, through our legislature, has approved this bond money for us. And we don't want the state to think that we're not appreciating this program. And we want to make sure that the program gets enhanced. And it's not going to be easy to do if there's still money left on the table. So we are working very diligently to do that. So other projects that LOTCIP can pay for are sidewalk projects, bridge improvements, multi-use trails, but most importantly, for road improvements on those functional, roadways, the urban collectors and higher. Transit, we do administer the 5310 program. Meriden currently has a pending application for a new bus for your senior center. So we've been working with that. There's a new program, Active Transportation Micro Grant. So schools and other nonprofits or municipalities can apply for $5,000 to help buy equipment to enhance bike safety and things like that. So get those applications in.
Is there a limit on how many applications can a municipality apply for?
For lot zip, no, because we're trying to spend down that surplus. You know, in COGS that are fully programmed, you know, there are scoring, you know, systems that you have to go through. With us right now, it is first come, first serve. With the micro grants, I think a municipality can only apply for 2. And then, but other agencies within your community can apply. So if you have a nonprofit that is involved in something like that, or a school, they can also apply. And again, that's first come, first served too, because it's a limited funded program.
Share some more examples of projects that have been funded.
From which, from both. What was your last lot zip project?
The Oregon Road Bridge is the one that's coming up.
That's the one coming up.
That's the newest one.
You just finished 2.
I thought you were involved in Co Avenue too, weren't you?
Co Avenues.
Yep, Co Avenue work. And then I think
Columbus?
it was also.
Columbus Ave?
No, it wasn't Columbus. It's, Caravetas, what's the side street? Pratt, no, it's not Miller, it's not Pratt, what's the one? Cedar Bridge.
Cedar
You're involved in this
Bridge,
one.
yeah.
Sorry, a little tour around town.
Columbus project?
Those were all bridges that we just recently did, and the study was the trail that we worked with downtown, but we can sit, I know where you're going, so we'll figure it out.
Economic development impact on any of the stuff that you're thinking about doing on it, and is pure transportation, it sounds like.
Well,
It's not.
you know, we touched on a little bit when we talk about the bike trails becoming more than just recreation. It gives away, especially for us, when you bring them right down to the green and everything else, you can buy some restaurants that can benefit from that. As far as an economic development side of it, when we're using this funds, it's not funds that we as the city are expending, so therefore it has a huge economical upside because it doesn't hit our tax base with a bill for it.
But going forward, as you think about, let's say One King or any other asset that's an important economic asset in the town, planning 3 years from now, in concert with the negotiation with the developer, that's the kind of thing to think about.
Yeah, and we have been.
Right, rather than say, yeah, because the money's there, they need to spend it.
Yeah.
Paving always goes on the last way.
And when I say these underlying fundamental planning documents, don't underestimate their shelf value. Right now, there are some interchange improvements being made and designed on Route 15 that showed up first in a planning document that Scrog did in 2006. So sometimes, you know, it takes a while for funding to come about. Sometimes it takes a while for public to come on board.
We've also been talking about Route 5. I mean, that's Wallingford, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's gotta be, and there are activities that the chamber, I know, has been involved in and all.
Yep.
Yeah, we just did, that was the other one that we just did, the Route 5 corridor study from us all the way down to the Merritt Park.
In implementation of some of there are bottlenecks, there are problems, there are things that's now the decline of the mall, the demise of the mall. We're talking about that's our primary economic retail space, and a big economic impact is spinning out,
Sure.
So, so this is sort of the thing we have to think about. I had a couple of questions relating to your freight study in particular. Because obviously businesses, we're going to have to deal with that here, but I haven't had the opportunity to represent a number of businesses who have attempted to bring in materials either by rail or by barge into New Haven. And then, but to get from the New Haven port to a rail line, to a spot where you can store the materials, and we actually did that. I represented the local steel company that was bringing in steel billets that are used in its manufacturing operation, and we were bringing it in overseas in Port of New Haven, and it was finally, it was so hard, so difficult, we finally just stopped it. And relying on trucks and so, they, fixing, and I know this is a coordination between the Port Authority, which controls that thing,
Well,
and,
so,
and rail, and pushing into rail in particular is something that really has to be done if you want to really spark manufacturing activity, in this area. You're gonna have to do something about New Haven, and New Haven Port, and the rail system.
so it's very complicated, especially from a regulatory perspective. It's dependent on our infrastructure. Not all rail can handle freight. And not all roads not all bridges can handle freight. So it's infrastructure, it's regulatory, and there's some misunderstanding, like you just mentioned New Haven Port Authority. Do you know that the New Haven Port Authority exists to manage an 11-acre piece of property that's owned by the city? It's not controlling all of New Haven Port. So you talked earlier about, maybe needing a manufacturing or a research parkway association. Actually, that might be a recommendation, right? That the operators within the New Haven Port area maybe should associate.
Isn't it under the Port Authority? Aren't all three ports under them now?
The New Haven Port Authority, there is no Port Authority. The New Haven Port Authority controls the New Haven-owned parcel.
My error, because I know that they created the Port Authority, that's undertaking New London. I believe it also controls Bridgeport now.
Maybe.
And I thought New Haven, that's why and they're putting all of their resources at the moment into New London because of the wind farms. But Bridgeport also is getting some interest from what I hear. But New Haven has been sort of left behind and out of it from.
Well, we're hoping this study's gonna muddle through some of those things.
But manufacturing is something we've got to think about, plan on.
Absolutely. And so we do recognize, right, that while there is a lot of money available right now, that it is a burden on the administrative staff in all municipalities. And state of Connecticut, we've heard it from our partners, that even the funding opportunities that our state government can apply for, state of Connecticut has found it burdensome within their staffing because they're having a hard time filling positions sometimes too. So one thing that we have done at SCROG, because part of our funding comes from a regional services grant from the state of Connecticut to provide municipal services and opportunities for regional planning, is that we have contracted with a grant administrator that you know very well, Juliet Brodelsky, who used to be one of your employees, and her colleagues. And this presentation is being brought to you by one of those partnerships through SCROG. And you can access these grant consultants to help you with your grant applications. They're not going to write them. We just don't have that much money to write your applications. But certainly they can help you. They can peer review your application so that you know that once you do submit that application, it is in its best form. I mentioned our new hire, Tatum Thomas. They are a self-proclaimed data geek, okay? Tatum will drill down and help you collect, organize, and present the data that you need to help you with your application so that you can justify why your municipality should get a grant over another.
You also have Renata Bertocchi.
And Renata Bertotti is also associated with with Juliet, so that is great. Economic development is part of our charge as well. That's what Dale is a subcontractor to Rex Development, which is an organization that is a direct recipient of funds from SCROG to do that kind of activity. I could go on and on about some of the other programs that we do, but I think the biggest message that I want to say to you today is think about us. Call us, tell us what your project is, and I'll give you a real good example. Representative Courtney's office called us 2 weeks ago and said, hey, we received the earmark applications, but a couple of the projects became ineligible. Do you have anything that you know of in Madison that might be good? And we were able to connect Madison with Representative Courtney's, and I think an application is pending right now for that. Because we were in that direct communication with the town of Madison, we knew what their priorities were, we knew what some of their project ideas were, and we were able to make that connection. So that's what we're hoping to do for you.
Laura, what's the schedule for the municipal study grant program? When does it come out?
So we just put out a solicitation maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. If you have a municipal study, send it request, send it in, and I'll make sure that we consider it. Because the UPWP process is a 2-year process, and we're July 1, we're into our 2nd year. When that happens, we usually recalibrate the budget, see what what we've spent, what we haven't spent, and we'll try to fit you in.
All right, well. Just some final thoughts for today. First, I'd like to thank all the speakers. We try to give you a variety of things to think about. There's a process that's going to go on at some point where we really want to hear from you beyond just the questions of what the priorities should be. Planning, funding, critical to making things happen in economic and community development. The next session is June 5th. We're going to be talking about funding. Specifically, we're going to be hearing from the State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. We're going to have representatives from the Green Bank to talk about funding for small businesses, for saving money on making green improvements to your building, and Meriden own CEDF, which is a lender for small businesses, will be speaking, and we may have a 4th that I'm working on that we haven't secured yet. That's going to be on June 5th. So this really a good focus on small businesses is going to be that day. And then on, of course, the 27th will be on business retention and expansion. We have a whole bunch of speakers for that. And we'll also be talking about workforce development extensively with your superintendent of schools as a speaker. So with that, thank you for coming. Please talk to the speakers, and there's some food in the back, and we'll see you on the 5th.